Alrighty, in today's video, we're going to be exploring Notion databases at a fundamental level. This is sort of a continuation of my previous video around getting started with Notion and learning how to use Notion as a beginner. The easiest way to get started with Notion and databases is to use the slash and then to type in database. Right away we have several options that we can use. They've conveniently show each type of view that Notion offers through their databases: timeline view, calendar view, list view, gallery view, board view, and then the standard table view. And then we have the ability to database full page and database inline. Database inline just means that the database shows within the greater page, so you can still add headers, other blocks under the database. And so if you view the database from the title, for example, it gets linked to a page of its own. If we create a database from full page, we'll immediately get sent to a new table, and it'll appear like that within the page that you put it in. Just want to show those examples real quick. Also, when you create a new page, you have the ability to create a database off the bat, and all 6 views are conveniently shown so that if you do click on any one of these, you're prompted to select a data source. If not, you can create a new database, which we will go ahead and do. So I just created that database, but now because I created that database directly through that new page, I need to create another page. You can click, drag. So just personal preference for me, but I personally like to create a page and then add the database within the page, rather than creating page here and then selecting a database like I did. Just a personal preference thing for me. Whenever you create any new database in Notion, the tags property automatically shows up. I'm just going to delete that. The table view is probably the easiest one to understand, whether you're coming from Excel, whether you're coming from Google Sheets. I feel like the table view is pretty straightforward when it comes to Notion's 6 database views. If you wanted to switch the view type within the current database, we can also go ahead and do that by going to the 3 dots and then clicking on layout, and then we can select out of the 6 possible ones which one we want to use. It's instantaneous, and each view has its own way of showing information. I would say the table and list view have the most similarities in terms of just the standard property showing. The timeline and calendar are specific to dates, and so timeline has a more horizontal timeline view, and then a calendar is just like the calendar that we're used to in real time. The board and gallery have card-specific views in which you can preview or show images based on a property or page content or a page cover, in which you can set. And then you can also change the size, as you can see here. And then specifically within the board view is a requirement to group by a certain property, and that is just how the board view works. You can group any database view except for the calendar views, and you can filter and sort in all the views as well. Notion automations, obviously handy as well. You will need PlusPlan to have access to that. The magnifying glass is a great search tool if you want to search through a bigger database that you have or that you've imported into Notion, for example. And we have the 3 dots. We just looked at the layout section. And again, I would urge you to just briefly look at each of these settings for each view, because these sort of provide a little more context into how you can choose to show your information and how you can wrap things, how you can color things, and even showing vertical lines, and so on and so forth. Once you sort of explore past the layouts, we're always going to see the properties, filter, sort. Again, the group is going to be specific to the view, and I think it's just going to be the calendar view where you can't use the group. Sub-items and dependencies are sort of additional features that anyone can add within a database environment, and sub-items, as you can see, are kind of like the ability to layer database entries under each other, and so you have a child item and a parent item, and so these are called sub-items. The dependencies are sort of a newer feature that Notion introduced in the last year or so, and that is just going to be 2 relational properties that are defined as blocked by and blocking. And so as you can see here, it's basically meant to create a sequence of relationships between database entries. And so if you have a workflow of 10 steps, dependencies are a great way to connect them sequentially and to layer them in a way that says, hey, we can't work on this thing until we finish this. We can indicate that through 2 different relational properties, through blocked and blocking. This load limit is going to be actually really helpful the more you get into Notion and the bigger databases you work with. And that just means how many of database entries do you want to load initially before you have to click on load more to load more database entries within the view. I'm just in the table view. If I go to board view and I go here, we sort of see a similar layout, right? Same with timeline view, calendar view, the list view there, and the gallery view there. Notice how in each view these last 4 options are available, and I would familiarize myself with all of these eventually. Obviously, delete view is helpful. Duplicating views is always really helpful because if you want to experiment, you can easily do that by duplicating and renaming or editing. Copying the link to a view can also be immensely helpful. If you know you want a certain view in a certain page, you can quickly copy link to the view, get a notification like so, and then you can paste it like that and then create that linked view that we just copied. The last one's locking databases, and that just means that the structure and the database specifics that we configure here and the filter, sort, and automations can't be edited. And so it's sort of an optional thing that you might be able to use later on if you're working with other people and you don't want things to be edited or accidentally clicked on. I think for the most part, these 3 dots and these sidebar items are going to be important to understand and learn how to use. And I think Notion is one of those things where I'd urge you to try to click on everything first before truly trying to create something without knowing Notion's full capabilities using all of these different features. I think another huge component of databases are database templates, and database templates can be created by clicking on the drop down next to the new that appears in every database view. So when we do that, something like that pops up, and then you're able to create a new template. When you are able to edit it, you'll see this banner, this ribbon pop up, and this is your first indicator that you're editing a template and not a entry within a database. I can name it, can create these relational property references. Now, once I edited that template and I go back to that drop down, empty is still the default, and so we want to click on the 3 dots and set this as a default. I'm going to click on for all views in Notion databases. If you wanted to just for this singular view, you can click on only on gallery view. But in our case, we'll just click on that. I'm going to create that new entry to show you how that works. So if I click on new template, what it's called, the date gets automatically filled, or the date that I made it, and then the status is automatically set to start. So this is a really great way to pre-configure, templatize pages, templatize database entries, so on and so forth. Really valuable if you have a lot of repeatable tasks, projects, ideas, notes, whatever it might be. I think something I haven't talked about a lot on my channel is also the ability to create recurring database templates, which are huge. And the way you can access that is to go through to those 3 dots, clicking on it, and then you can hover to repeat. You can see that off is currently on, and so we can click on that, and then we can specify the frequency of repetition and say, do we want to repeat it every year, every month, every week, and every day? If we wanted to create a weekly template, we can say that we want to repeat it weekly. We can specify frequency in weeks and then specify days of the week, as well as when we want to start it and when we want to create this database entry. And I think this will be responsive to your time zone, so you won't have to worry about that. And if you know that something is recurring every set time period, I highly recommend exploring this. What you can actually do eventually is when you are editing this and you add a person property, you can specify the person who duplicated page. In this case, because it's a recurring template, it would be the person's account. And so this would specify me, and then it would pop up on my sidebar and notify me that the new template has been created with the status and the date. Again, there's many more properties to explore. I'm not going to dig too much into what these properties do because I feel like they're all pretty straightforward. By now, if you're watching this video, you probably have looked at these properties in some way. Again, if I wanted to duplicate it, I can right click, duplicate. Now I have the exact same view. I can select on a list. Now I can rename it. If you explore other videos on my channel or have the opportunity to do so, a lot of my videos go over how to navigate databases and how to interact database properties through formulas and through automations. And so if you aren't necessarily sure about how you think you can use these databases, it might be worth your time to explore my other videos that demonstrate how you can take advantage of these properties in very opportunistic ways. I'm also not really going to go over the views that are specific to each database view because I think there's plenty of resources around these 6 views. I do have several views that I really like to use for clients and for myself, demonstrate all kinds of things, but I think I'll make that into a different video and share that with you all later. Really helpful tip, regardless of what database view you're using, is clickability and dragging and bulk selecting. Within a table view, you can select that. Notice how that square pops up. I'm going to duplicate it. Basically, it's another way to bulk select everything in the database view. This will be the case just for the table view. I'm going to just duplicate it. Let's say I wanted to select everything, but not 3. Select everything through that and then deselect. And now I can right click and then edit properties in bulk, move them, delete them, copy links to all, stuff like that. Clicking and dragging, for example, you can highlight it like you would cells on Excel or Google Sheets. You can delete, so on and so forth. Even click and drag to duplicate that property entry across rows. I think every view looks slightly different. And so before you go into further customization, I would always start at the property section and decide how much you want to show. For example, if we were to create a board view and we're grouping by status, we probably don't need to show the status. It's just redundant, and because the column is titled with the status, there's no need to show it for these entries. With grouped categories, you can click on the total. It's always set as count all as the default, and then you can use out these presets to do some very basic things across properties. Because date is one of the properties, we can see that date is one of those options that we can preset. In list view, if we really want to, we can show that grouping again. And this is what it would look like because everything is assigned to me. That same configuration of presets pops up, and right now it's counting the number of entries and where I'm assigned. And there's nothing else that's assigned because there's only 3 entries in total. And you can see the start there. When you do that, now you can see the date, and you can always change the order so we see the date first and then the status. Timeline, because it's a date horizon, we can use it to drag the entry across the calendar date. We can also specify time increments that we want to organize by. Do we want to organize by hour? Do we want to organize by month or even by year? This is another way to organize from a sort of time sensitive or time specific lens, and I'm just kind of quickly going through some of the pointers that I feel like are valuable when it comes to using these views. I think another thing I'll explore is creating those dependencies. They recently added this automatically shifting capability. If something takes 3 days to start or a 3-day lead time, and so if that date gets shifted by 7 days, what happens to everything else behind it? So now if something gets shifted by 3 days, everything else gets shifted by that same amount. And so this is basically what that is configuring. Do we always maintain time between items, shift only when dates overlap, or do we not automatically shift at all? So I'm just going to click that for now. For demonstration purposes, it doesn't matter, but for your case, I would say to think about the importance of lead time and overlap when you start playing around with the timeline view. So now, because dependencies are on, when we open up the property, notice these 2 relational properties that I mentioned earlier. Blocked by and blocking. These are just to signify that one is preventing the other from happening. And now in the timeline view, we have these yellow arrows pop up when we hover over these entries. So what we can do now is when we click on the yellow arrow, we can drag it and say, do we want to connect it here? Do we want to connect it there? We will connect it there. I'll also connect this over there. And so when I did that now, see what happened, right? These properties auto-configured and said, hey, this entry is blocking this one. And if you go to here, it's being blocked by that one, and it's blocking that one. And so if you look at this one, it's blocked by. This is the framing and the wording that they use, and you can rename this obviously. But from a relational standpoint, it'll be important to understand which means what. Blocked by means that it's being prevented by this. Blocking means that it's actively preventing something from happening. And so we're creating that 2-way relational connection when we enable dependencies. And so in a timeline view, we can show that through these arrows. And on other views, we don't have that arrow visual, but so we can still see it through the properties like we did here. I think I'll also turn on sub items. And when that happens, every time you hover over a database entry, this turns into this triangle toggle. So when you click on it, notice how this plus new sub item pops up. When you click on it, you basically create a new item that's been layered under here. And so in this case, we get two new properties, parent item and sub item, and you can imagine parent item means that the current database entry is layered under that, and then if it has a sub item entry, it means that that current page is the parent of that entry. In this case, when you hover over to a new entry, click on the triangle and then the new sub item, it'll automatically create that parent sub item relationship. In this case, this is parent, and then if you go here, sub item is that. It might be a little confusing because everything's named the same, but I hope you get what I'm trying to say. So when you hide those toggles, only the parent item show, and sometimes you want to show sub items, and so you can use the filter and you can say where parent item is not empty. When we add that filter, it grays out all the parent items and it only shows and emphasizes the sub items, because parent items have an empty relational property and sub items always have that parent item associated with it. That's a really great way to use a filter and show and emphasize the sub items. I have another video that goes over filters, so I strongly urge you to check that out. I think when we think about database properties, we can infinitely add them, but I think personally speaking, you should almost never have more than 10. And if you do, is there a way to relationally create a new database, connect to that one, so that you can sort of organize and create a web or a strategically connected set of databases so that you don't overwhelm yourself with properties? I think something I also want to go over is when you add a property, you have these AI properties. These are relatively new. If you have time, I would check it out and see what you can do with them. But if you scroll to the very bottom of the property list, before you get to connections, you have these 5 automatic properties. These automatic properties, once you add them to your database, you don't need to modify them, and they are responsive to when you create them, when you last edit them. I think one of the most valuable, easiest things that you can do with almost any database is to always create this last edited time. And notice how you can set those things within the date, totally up to you. But what I want to show you is when you use this sort filter. And so when you use this sort filter, I like to just sort by that last edited time and then set it by descending. So now in this view, we see items that were sorted more recently, 557 versus 556. Same with this list view. If we want to add this sort, add that last edited time descending, and we can show that. We can see everything based on recency. And so the sort categorization that we added is a really easy way to show everything by recency and build in that extra, okay, well, let's already revisit what we've already been working on so we don't have to spend as much time looking for it. Another thing that I thought about is for every view, if you have preferences for the way in which you open up database entries, you have the ability to change how the pages get opened. So regardless of every one of these views, you have that open pages in, and so you can select side peek, center peek, or full page. You can choose if you want to just have it open up to the side, view it in the center, this, or if you want to have it full page so that when you click on it, you jump straight to the page like this. From a user experience standpoint, I'd explore how you open those pages. Most of the time, side peek is going to be the default, so if you really don't like side peek, I would make sure you change that first thing. If you do end up inevitably having more than 10 database properties, this is to illustrate my next feature example for these database views. Obviously, inevitably, you might have more than 10 database properties, and there's no problem with that. Let's say you have 30 or 50 properties, but not all the time are you going to be using all 30 or 50 at once, right? I think in most cases, you're only going to be selectively filling out information and probably not need to see every single bit of all the different properties that you could fill out. Something we can do to declutter property usage is by going on these 3 dots within the database entry, clicking on it, and then going to Customize Page. What this does is you get to this menu in which you're customizing all pages within the database. And so you can choose these 3 settings. These I don't think are as important in the beginning, but this is the section that I want to sort of point everyone towards. For every property, you have 3 options. Sometimes you only have 2, depending on the property type. You have the ability to always show, always hide, and then hide when. And in this case, we're going to be emphasizing the hide when empty toggle. I've created all of these random properties to show you that in action. So I'm just going to hide a bunch of stuff when empty. Everything was always show, and then I just changed these 5 to hide when empty. So now when I get out of here, and when I open a new property, it looks like it's not hiding, but now you see this hide 4 properties. So now, because those 4 properties, number and number 1 and text, are empty, I don't see them within this view. Again, if I want to just do it here, I can also do that. I can click on the property itself and go to property visibility and then specify it there as well. Favorites is a valuable way to add it to your sidebar. New template, remove it. You can also click on the clock icon to see all the changes that's been happening within that database entry. See the comments if you're working with other people, and then you can also share it through email or publish it to the web. And this is all within that database entry, and this is the full page view. Again, when we're on the databases page view and we click on the 3 dots, this is also what we get, and we can sort of explore these other features around the database. Okay. So I think this is a good enough video for beginners learning Notion and databases. So if you stuck around this long, thanks for watching, and I hope that I was able to improve the way you approach and think about Notion through this video. Thank you so much for all the support.